right, so as you can tell, I just went ahead and started the recording for the meeting here. I think we'll go ahead and get started with the September meeting of the North Florida Buck O'Neill chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research. Thanks everybody for joining us. First things first, let's do a little check-in here. How's everyone faring these days?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Still on.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, on the green side of the grass, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
My predictions suck other than that.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
Welcome to that club.
I'm glad I can't see him. I don't want to look. I've already said my goodbyes to the trophy, and I'll be handing it off to whomever he has to win it for 2021. For folks who aren't aware, that's our trophy for the winner of the annual chapter predictions on the MLB season. The division winners, the wild cards, the league champ finalists in each league, the league champs in each league, and the World Series champion on a sliding scale, shall we say, I wish, of point scoring. And so far, Chuck, who have we got in the lead right now? I know you said the other day, but I don't.
Art and Ben and Rick.
Wait, Rick Swain, really?
Yep.
Oh, good.
And Glenn is in second place, along with Clint, 1 point back.
Ah, okay.
So there's actually 5 out there.
All right, well, then that's good. That's a decent competition. We shall see what happens here at the end of September / early October and where things stand at the end of the regular season. We know that there are some teams whose situation has improved, and there are other teams whose situations have not improved. They've gone in the other direction. And of course, one of those being Chuck, your Padres, unfortunately, going in the wrong direction. And Mr. Putnam, your Red Sox also.
Yeah, and my pick to win it all in our contest happens to be the Padres. So if you can see, I've had a great month here.
Yeah, you're looking very good, hale and hearty there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So well, anyone who, like me, picked the Twins at the beginning of the year to win the Central, that looks real good right now.
Yeah, that's solid. No sweat.
Yeah, no problem. They're in great shape. Oh my God.
Matt, for those that are unfamiliar with that prognostication that you do every year, or everybody does, they just need to know how good we are at it. That I think it's roughly 5 of the last 6 years when Chuck has used randomized numbers for people that didn't submit the guess, the randomized person has finished no worse than second. So.
Yeah, that's probably not far from the truth, actually. Yeah, so that's it is a fun competition that we all enjoy doing, but yeah, it can be humbling. Like so many things in life, it can be a humbling experience.
We also have in the Atlanta chapter a similar competition each year, and I think the last time someone checked about a week ago, it was decided that everyone has been eliminated already.
No award this year, huh?
Yeah, no, well, yeah, there's some merit to that based on some of the picks. Yeah, unfortunately, it's there's some picks I regret for sure, and I think we all have those. So, what are folks thinking about the season here now that we've turned the corner into the home stretch of September?
I'm standing by my usual motto, which is very simply, anybody but the Yankees. I'm rooting for 29 other teams.
Yep. There you go.
Your odds are good there, Kim. Yeah.
Brent, you there?
Hey, Brent.
Yeah, I was going to ask Kennedy, that one inning last night of the Red Sox, it looked like a circus. I was thinking about you, Kent. The 6-run inning the Rays had when
Oh yeah.
the 2 or 3 errors and they were chasing after pop-ups that went over the right fielder's head. I mean, it was an incredibly, of course, now Bogarts is out, which doesn't help them either.
No, and they are one of the, just was reading this morning, they're one of the least vaccinated teams. So all this, decimation of the roster right now is not a big surprise.
No, no, I hadn't heard that.
I'm a huge Rays fan this year, watching all those no names. They just play the game so well.
I agree.
Yep,
I agree.
same with me.
They don't give anybody anything.
No,
Go Rays, go Braves.
yeah, speaking of the Braves, as Mr. Dumpy has brought them up, how about them Mets and what's happened to that team?
Yeah, really.
Boo-
Thank goodness.
Booing their own fans.
Yeah, booing them. I watched the Marlin Mets game, a doubleheader the other day, and the booing was constant. I mean, their fans have turned on them. It's really something to watch. But the rest of us turned on them before, but so
I don't think there's another franchise in the majors that could quite pull off what the Mets have done in terms of turning booing into a primary form of communication between fans and players. That's so Mets. It's just so Mets. I don't know.
Well, it's a daily soap opera.
yeah,
I'm
That
sure.
it is.
I'm sure everybody saw the news today about their GM.
yeah.
Yes, I saw that right before I got online here to get the meeting going.
Did they fire him?
Not yet.
Okay, and I think the USA Today article I read said that suggested they bring oh geez, the guy from the Red Sox and the Cubs and
Oh, Theo
CEO?
Epstein?
Yeah.
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 So what happened to the GM of the team I picked to win the World Series this year?
Well,
I didn't get the news today.
they had a party last night, and he was found, get this, parked near the courthouse at 4 o'clock in the morning, sound asleep, drunk off his ass. He was arrested for drunk driving, and the team hasn't fired him yet.
Well, that made arraignment pretty easy in the morning.
Yeah.
Just wait here. We'll come get you when you're called.
Yeah, really.
I didn't know Alex Rodriguez was the GM of the Mets. I must have missed something.
I believe he came from a party held by the owner, Cohen.
Yes.
Yes, he
Oh,
did.
did he? Oh, that
Yeah.
I did not.
So
see.
that might have some effect on it.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord.
Oh,
Players
but
are too.
but why would you pull up to a courthouse?
It bore a striking resemblance to his
I
apartment.
haven't heard that.
Was he turning himself in? Maybe, I don't know. Typical net Mets.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It boggles the mind, and yet it doesn't, because it's, well, the Mets. So yeah. Any other thoughts about how the majors are going so far here this late in the season? Any other observations or notes of interest for the group?
I have a 55-year-old Mets tidbit I heard the other day. I don't know how well known this is, but in the mid 1960s, when Joan Whitney Payson was the Mets owner, she would have the team syndicated to Bar Harbor, Maine specifically, so that she could watch them. Like, I guess people in Maine had access to all the Mets games all summer just because that's where she summered. But that's an aside, I guess. But
Yeah, and so in the mid 60s, when the Mets were still the mess as opposed to the Mets.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure the people down there in Maine were real happy with that privilege. So, ooh. Yikes. That is pretty interesting. Although I think as far as owners go, she seems to be one of the ones in their history who had a real care and concern and love for that team, and seemed to do a decent job, shall we say, if an owner can be said to do so, of owning that team and running it. It seemed to have an abiding care for it, unlike many of their subsequent owners who,
yes.
yeah, each came with their own special set of challenges. Well, one other thing I'd want to draw attention to before we move on here, and I turn the floor over to Clayton to do his presentation, or really a conversation, I think is how he would maybe prefer to do the his part of the program this evening. Is last week, I think it was last week, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been only a few days ago, you found that article and shared with the group from the New York Times the significance of today in the history of Major League Baseball. Did you want to say a little something about that?
Well, I remember it, and I was just astounded. I had forgotten about it as an anniversary, but I thought it was just an astounding situation. And just before I got on, they were interviewing a couple of them. I can't remember. I just saw it on the way out. They were on CBS being interviewed, and it was just a really neat situation, and kind of equating it to something as not as special as Jackie Robinson, but second is how they described it, the second special event.
Yeah.
They said it got no attention because the papers were all on strike.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, in the Pittsburgh area, that is correct. Yeah, and I thought it was also very interesting that the Pirates are going to host maybe this is where the interview that you saw, Glenn. We're talking, of course, about the 50th anniversary of the first all African-American / Latino lineup in the history of modern Major League Baseball. And the panel discussion, I believe, that the Pirates were hosting either yesterday or today involved the 4 living members of that starting 9. And Al Oliver, Gene Clines, Dave Cash, and Manny Sanguillen. And I would have very much enjoyed being able to hear that panel discussion. I'm hoping that that's been documented somewhere and will be available soon. But this,
As I was walking out, seeing the CBS on the set, I guess it was Sanguillen. I couldn't tell. They were all so old. I couldn't quite recognize them all. But Sanguillen said that one of the best quotes he ever heard on the game was that the manager just wanted to give the white guys a day off.
Nice.
If you guys get the MLB channel, they've been running it all day, and they've been interviewing all the players that were involved. And there's a documentary, so check it out. And Al Oliver has been speaking all over the place about what happened that day. The truth is, they didn't even realize themselves till they were about the third or fourth inning of the game that this was historic.
yeah,
And the Murtaugh, who was the manager at the time, purposely did it, but didn't say anything. He put everybody out there that was all either African American or Hispanic, but he didn't say anything about it, and didn't say anything.
It's just another game.
Yeah, it was just another game. And so
then Doc Ellis got shelled and was out in 2 innings.
yeah.
But it wasn't until about the third inning that a couple of the players turned to each other and said, "You know what? Look around. Look who's out there." That was pretty cool.
Doc Ellis also said they'd never do it. He said they don't have the courage to do it.
Yep.
They did it.
They did it. And of all people, Danny Murtaugh, who didn't have any kind of, well, as far as anybody knew, didn't have any kind of thought one way or the other on civil rights or on social activism or anything like that. He was, if there ever was a manager who was all about just winning between the lines and let's just go into the clubhouse afterward, have a couple of beers and on we go.
Maybe that's what he did. Just put the best lineup he had, for that day.
Ebner was hurt. Bob Robertson was hurt. And so here you go. And the Pirates had tremendous depth at that point. I mean, that was a period in their history, that late 60s, 70s team. A lot of talent. It's a phenomenal lineup. So
one of the guys said, I assumed he was commenting on the game, but he said you would never believe at how many racial epithets were said out of the stands. He said the profanity was just coming down on like rain. He said it was really something.
Really? Was it in Pittsburgh or was it an away game? Does anybody remember?
I'm not sure if it was away. Yeah.
I thought it was in Pittsburgh.
I did too.
Yeah, I thought it was too, but I'm
I
not
was
sure.
just wondering. Yeah. I'll make a note. We'll look it up.
Yeah.
It was Three Rivers Stadium, played against the Phillies.
Yep.
There you go.
Thank you, John. Yeah, the Phillies jumped up to that early lead that Jim was talking about, and then Pirates battled back and won it.
Yeah, it was a slugfest. It was.
Freddie Fryman pitched,
10-7 final score.
Phillies.
No, Pittsburgh won.
Yeah, Pittsburgh won. Pirates won.
Pirates won 10-7.
Right.
So I thought it was worth recognizing on the 50th anniversary of that very momentous event that at the time, not too many people were aware of was happening, at least not in the moment when they first took the field there in the top of the first. Anything else for the good of the order before we turn it over to Clayton for his presentation this evening? All right. Well, Clayton, with that, the floor is yours to share with us your forthcoming book on Loserville.
Well, Matt, first of all, thanks for having me on, and thank you all for coming. My book is entitled Loserville: How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta and How Atlanta Remade Professional Sports. In relationship to what we were just talking about, in the first Major League Baseball game played in Atlanta between two Major League teams, it was an exhibition game in April '65 between the Milwaukee Braves, who were still in a legal fight over whether they were going to end up in Atlanta or not, and the Detroit Tigers. The Braves started a majority African-American lineup that night. And all the national press didn't note this. The Atlanta press noted what a big deal this was. In the state of Georgia, a state which still had some Jim Crow laws on the books. I mean, Atlanta was more progressive than the rest of the state, but you had a lineup which included you had Rico Cardi, you had Felipe Alou, Hank Aaron, Mac Jones, I forget who the fifth guy was, all in the lineup that night. Having that happen in Georgia in the mid 1960s was in itself a fairly incredible thing, I think. More generally, my book, Loserville, is an account of Atlanta's pursuit of pro sports in the 1960s and the response to pro sports in the city in the 60s and 70s. The book is probably about 60% Braves, I would say. It also includes a lot of coverage of the Atlanta Falcons, the National Football League, the Atlanta Hawks of the NBA, and the Atlanta Flames of the National Hockey League. Atlanta gets 4 professional sports teams in a 6-year period. Between 1966 and 1972, Atlanta goes from a city that has 0 major professional sports franchises to a city that has teams in all 4 major professional leagues. Atlanta does this by really taking an unprecedented path to major professional sports. There had obviously been teams that had relocated before. There'd been cities that had offered subsidies for stadiums beforehand. But no city had ever so explicitly campaigned to become a big league town, a major league city, as their mayor Ivan Allen called it when he ran for mayor in 1961. They had a city government, a city corporate leadership that is explicitly focused on making their community a big league city. Partially, this is out of a desire for prestige. It appears in the standings alongside New York and Los Angeles and Boston and Philadelphia and Chicago. Partially, it was done for a sense of civic unity as well, something that would bring the community together. A place that had divisions between city and suburb, newcomer and local, black and white divisions as well, certainly. It was seen as serving sources of civic prestige and also sources of civic unity by the leaders. They spoke very explicitly of this at the time in their reasoning for why they brought pro sports to the city. Atlanta essentially hyped its way into the big leagues, pushing for pro sports in the same way they would have a factory coming from another part of the country or the branch plant of a large corporation. Beginning in the 1920s, Atlanta had become very good at this, had done a great job luring capital from other parts of the country. They basically employed this model of rolling out the red carpet, offering public subsidies to make their city a major professional sports town. And they did so more rapidly than anybody had ever done so before. By 1972, Atlanta is one of just 9 cities in North America with teams in all 4 of the major professional sports leagues. Essentially, my story is about the response to this by the locals. It all proves to be too much too soon, really, for the audience in Atlanta. Atlanta has just over 1 million people by the mid-1960s as a metropolitan area. It grows to about 2 million by the mid-1970s. And in many ways, they end up with more than they can handle. The teams all struggle. They struggle in the standings in part because most of them have either absentee or new ownership. to pro sports, or they deal with the issue of struggling in the stands as well. All four franchises end up below average in attendance in their leagues. The Braves by the mid 1970s are averaging about 6,000 fans per game in a 55,000 seat stadium. When Ted Turner buys the team, he moves all the people down so that they appear behind home plate with the television camera, so that looks a little better on TV. The Falcons break a record for no shows. The NFL is so dependent on season ticket sales for its means of generating its annual ticket sales. In 1974, the Falcons, nearly 40% of the fans who bought a ticket did not even bother to show up for the actual game they bought a ticket for, which was by far an NFL record. So in many ways, this is an account of how difficult it is to be an expansion city, and that cities didn't really foresee the difficulty in using these teams as a source of, I guess, civic unity. The book is in some ways a cautionary tale. It's also a story of how other cities ended up becoming major professional sports towns as well. If you look around across the Sun Belt in particular, whether it's to Houston, whether it's to Tampa, whether it's to Phoenix, whether it's to San Diego, cities either explicitly or in essence just modeled themselves after what Atlanta did in terms of luring teams to town. This very corporatized model of bringing pro sports to a community and luring teams to towns as the major professional sports leagues were looking to expand is essentially how Atlanta helps recreate modern sports, that they provide a model that cities end up using to become major leagues, to become major league communities. This has mixed results in different places. In some places it works better than others, but generally speaking, the aspirations that civic leaders have for bringing pro sports to town, it doesn't necessarily always work out as intended. My book is also an early history of the Braves, Falcons, Flames, and Hawks too, and it goes into the early history of each of these franchises in the cities. So it's both a book about a city as well as a book about its teams, and I try to cast it against a larger national landscape too. And beyond that, I'm happy for any questions on anything specifically about the book or the topic. I can go into greater detail in whatever interests you.
Clayton, I have a question. In your research, was there any economic data or assumptions about what the impact of having 4 professional teams was for Atlanta? Like you said, it went from 1 million to 2 million in a relatively short period of time.
Mm.
Did it help at all? It's always the big question about franchises and whether to have bond issues or whatever. Did they ever connect having those 4 teams to the fact that there was greater business interest coming into Atlanta or anything?
I think the teams lent the city a degree of prestige in the sense that people around the country saw the name Atlanta and associated it with the major leagues. But in terms of tangible economic benefits, whether it's Atlanta or more generally, most economists frown at the idea that pro sports ends up being this huge engine of economic development. Generally, what most scholars have found is that it essentially reroutes or recycles economic activity within a metropolitan area. I mean, you could say it has a benefit that it targets it to a particular place, but the idea that it's an engine of economic growth doesn't seem to be the case. That doesn't stop city boosters from using that argument, which they essentially do everywhere to this day. But it seems like among economists, they pretty broadly agree that it has a limited and muted economic impact on communities. Until the relatively recent past, the value pro sports franchises provided to a community were roughly the same as a super Walmart does to a community. So as a business, it's a big business in the sense of the whole league, but in particular, each franchise itself is almost like a medium-sized business until relatively recently with the expansion of TV money in these different leagues.
Does any of that parallel the growth of the airport, which of course has become increasingly important worldwide as well as nationwide?
Absolutely. Ivan Allen, the guy who was mayor in the 60s, who helped bring in the big leagues. His predecessor was a guy named William Hartsfield, who was mayor from the 1930s until 1961. He didn't care a thing about sports. He didn't think that was something that government should be involved in any respect. His main project was the airport. I mean, Atlanta's airport being the place where everybody transfers is essentially a product of the massive civic investments they made in the 40s and 50s under William Hartsfield. So that was, I mean, Hartsfield in many ways was a pothole politician, and he saw that as an extension of his pothole politics, that it was a way to bring something physical and tangible to make the city a transportation hub. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the airport's growth and development in some ways predates the pro sports development of the city, but in many ways they're parallel processes.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Today, last week I was up at the Braves Yankees
Mhm.
2-game series at the stadium. And now with it being out in Cobb County as opposed to Turner Field,
Yes.
what has been the response of the fans? It was a pretty full stadium for those 2 games. I noticed though that I don't know if half, probably not half, but maybe 30 or 40% were Yankee hats and Yankee screams, and they were out screaming the Atlanta fans, at least from where I was sitting. What has been the impact of that move? Do you know?
Well, in terms of both parts of the questions, I'll answer the second one first. That has been the perennial problem of Atlanta sports. It's a sea of people from other places, whether they're from New York or Boston or Chicago or Philadelphia. From the 1960s onward, they had a problem with having huge numbers of fans for the other teams at the games out cheering the Atlanta fans. So this is nothing new. It's an issue the city has always faced with its, not just the Braves, but all of the Atlanta teams have had that issue essentially. And also, to some extent, there's the issue of people going to games to see a particular star. I'm going to see when Sandy Koufax came to Atlanta in 1966. The night before he was there, they had 6,000 people. The night he was there, they had their first sellout of the season. The night after, they had 4,000. People were willing to go see this marquee attraction of Sandy Koufax, but the idea of generally sitting and sweating out an August night in the bleachers at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium had a much more limited appeal in the region. In terms of moving out to Cobb County, in some ways, that would have made sense 30 years ago. I would argue without the Olympics, that's probably what they would have done because that's where the fan base was historically. It was a very suburban fan base. When the team first announced that they had been secretly dealing with a taxing entity in Cobb County in 2014, they released a map of their season ticket base. It was out in the northern suburbs almost exclusively. It made complete sense for the stadium to be there. In some ways, the initial stadium was built in Atlanta as kind of a calling card for the community. That it was this kind of, they referred to it as our center of gravity, is what the city leaders called Atlanta Stadium. That they viewed it as a source of prestige for the community, having this amenity downtown, just like it was a theater or some other cultural attraction. So I think in many ways, moving out to Cobb County made sense. And the city was pretty pragmatic about it too. They had a mayor at the time named Kasim Reed, who said, we're not going to bargain to try to take the stadium back from Cobb County. The fan base of the team is much more out there than it is actually in the city of Atlanta. So they kind of just said bye when the Braves had been secretly dealing to build a facility out there. So I hope that answers both parts of your question. But
any chance they'll be called the Cobb Braves?
Well, I mean, there were people who talked about that at the time when the move happened. I mean, in Atlanta, there was a very popular T-shirt in 2017, right around the time of the move. Instead of the Braves logo, said Burbs, and on the back, Cobb 17. So.
They won't become the Guardians anytime soon, I take it.
Well, it does. I think it would have to be something that rhymes with Braves. The Guardians thing struck me as that when somebody's announcing Guardians, it sort of sounds like Indians, was my assumption with their thinking. So I think it would be something that kind of has the same cadence as Braves would be my guess if they changed their name.
Actually, I live in Cobb County, about 10 or 12 miles from the ballpark.
Oh, nice.
And when the deal was done, the city of Atlanta was dealing with the Braves and the Falcons as far as renewing leases with where they were playing at the time. The city was much more interested in dealing with the Falcons and really just paid lip service to the Braves.
Absolutely. And Arthur Blank kicked in a ton of money for that stadium too. So I think that's a part of the story as well. But yeah, absolutely, that's the case. And the Thrashers had also just left as well, and they kind of just said bye to the Thrashers too.
Well, when the Braves relocated, they wanted to make sure that they were still the Atlanta Braves.
Mhm.
Their address is really kind of strange. I don't know whether they worked with the post office or whatever, but they're not in the Atlanta city limits. They're not even in the same county where Atlanta, city of Atlanta is. They're across the river, but they do have an Atlanta mailing address. It's Atlanta. And I guess the address is 755 Hank Aaron Drive Southeast. It's Southeast Cobb County, but it reads like it's Southeast Atlanta. Actually, if you look at a map of Atlanta, the ballpark would be in Northwest Atlanta. It's kind of strange, but they did not want to be known as the Cobb Braves.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that they still had an Atlanta address.
Well, going back to the late 1960s when they built the I-285 perimeter, there were all kinds of companies who were not technically in the city of Atlanta who were getting Atlanta addresses from the post office because, you know, if you're from some other part of the country, you've never heard of whatever unincorporated area you're in or whatever town it is. They took an Atlanta address just because that was the name brand, and it seems like a continuation of that.
Yeah.
What's that metro population there now?
I think it's around 5.5 million, Tom. I defer to.
I don't know. I've been in Florida for the last month. I just came back today actually, and they released the census figures, but I didn't really pay much attention to what Atlanta's was. When I moved here in '79, it was about 2.5 million, and yeah, 7 to 8 million probably is close now. Of course,
there's always been the thing, which counties count as part, you know, is it initially it was the 5 county area, and now there was 18 and 21 and, you know, these huge different.
It's gone because Atlanta didn't have any real natural boundaries that would keep expansion from happening. There are no rivers or oceans or mountains or anything. It can just keep expanding outward. And as you say, everyone wants to be associated with Atlanta. If you run into someone, they say, I'm from Atlanta. And they say, oh, where do you live? And well, it's actually 30 miles from downtown Atlanta.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly grown.
Oh.
Clayton, I have a question for you. You mentioned right before we got going here with the meeting that you're from Vermont. You are the Vermont chapter president for SABR. Your background, your history, your roots are in New England.
Yes.
What led you to want to pursue a story about the history of Atlanta professional sports?
About 10 years ago, I was in graduate school, and my area of expertise is the history of American cities. And I wanted to write something about the history of pro sports franchise relocations. And initially, I wanted to write about it in a broad kind of continental sense. My advisor suggested pick a city that is emblematic of the changes that happened over the course of the second half of the 20th century, and use that as your case study. So I ended up focusing on Atlanta because in Atlanta, no city grew as much as a major pro sports city in the second half of the 20th century as Atlanta. And as I looked into it, it seemed like essentially everybody had just modeled themselves after Atlanta, to the point that some city leaders in other places, whether it was in Tampa, whether it was in San Diego, explicitly cited that we want to be the next Atlanta in terms of how we get to be a major league community. I had an uncle that had lived in Marietta for a few years. I'd been down a couple of times, but I had no actual connection to Atlanta. So I'm a complete outsider looking at this, and I was very thankful and very lucky to get help from very many people in the city, community, and region to help me with the research. It's a 10-year labor of love, and finally turned into a book.
Who were some talk to?
In terms of interviewees?
Interviewees or major sources. Yeah.
I consulted basically anything I could find in the city, in archives in the city of Atlanta, Georgia Tech, at the Atlanta History Center, at Emory. In terms of interviewees, I'm trying to think, Tommy Nobis, fairly, he was the Mr. Falcon. He was the first draft pick in the history of the Atlanta Falcons. I spoke with Ron Reed. I spoke with Bill Clement, who was one of the more prominent players in the Atlanta Flames. I spoke with Sam Massel, who was mayor of Atlanta in the early 1970s. I spoke with Frank DeFord on the Milwaukee Braves angle of it, because he had been a Milwaukee Braves fan and had a lot of thoughts on that. I spoke with about 15 players and coaches. I spoke with a number of political figures from the region. And I think most importantly, in my mind, I spoke with about 30 longtime Atlanta sports fans. The Atlanta chapter of SABR was actually fairly helpful. I spoke to a handful of SABR Atlanta members who'd been there since day one and gave me their thoughts on things. I went to an Atlanta Falcons tailgate and went around and found interviewees. One time, people who I spoke with a few different times. I have a number. Yeah, I relied very heavily on fans for their recollections of their experiences of fandom, because in many ways it's as much a story of what it was like to be a fan in this community as it is about the particular teams, as it is about the politics of it. So it's a history of a social history in some ways as much as anything.
Clayton, you mentioned that there were 9 cities that had all 4 pro franchises from that period.
Yes.
My memory's not perfect. I think I've got 8. What are the 9? Do you recall what the 9 were?
That's a great question. I don't specifically recall them. I mean, I'm assuming Boston, New York, Philly, Chicago,
Detroit,
who else?
St. Louis,
Detroit,
Chicago,
St. Louis.
Dallas, Los Angeles. I don't know when the hockey
I don't
team
think
got
Dallas
there.
wouldn't have had a hockey team at that point.
It's
Probably
Dallas and LA.
Minneapolis. North Stars was
Minneapolis.
still in Minneapolis.
They have the
Before they went to
Lakers.
Dallas.
Were the Lakers there then? Who was?
There was no team
Lakers
in
left in the
Minneapolis.
late 50s.
62, yeah, I think the Lakers left. I couldn't tell. I can go find that. I can go find that for you, but it was yeah, I guess it was the 9th community to have that, and it was the first one in the Southeast to have all of these.
Oh, they were the 9th. There wasn't 9 at the time, and they were the 10th. I misunderstood. Okay.
No, I think they were the 9th overall to do it. I mean, there were teams with 4 professional teams in the sense you had the ABA, which was expanding. You had the World Hockey Association also.
Right.
But in terms of the main core major league at the time, they were the 9th city to have teams in all those leagues. I mean, the World Hockey Association and ABA just take teams and throw them scattershot all over the place. So very quickly, a lot of teams had a sort of a taste of the major leagues. But in terms of the established league, Atlanta was the 9th.
Any further questions for Clayton?
Yes, Clayton.
Yes.
Did you address any of the racial issues in politics that were involved? Because, there's, I don't want us to gloss over those issues. There's tremendous racial issues. The Turner Field was a wonderful field, a wonderful ballpark. They could have done the same thing there that they did in Cobb County, but let's face it, it was not a very warming environment, and there was a lot of racial politics involved. So please talk about that.
Oh, that's a huge part of the book, certainly. I mean, from day one, if you look at the site of Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, this was an urban renewal site that had been plowed over in 1959. That had been a predominantly Black neighborhood called Summer Hill. City leaders promised they were going to build thousands of units of affordable housing there. The first sniff of interest from the major leagues, the city basically stabs those people in the back and sells the Atlanta Housing Authority sells the land to the Stadium Authority at a cut rate so they can get a big league stadium. They plop a stadium on this, surrounded with parking lots. And to the south of that are some of Atlanta's most impoverished neighborhoods. So it's certainly in many ways, as a story of urban renewal, a very tragic story that many thousands of people who were displaced by this expected to have an opportunity for housing again, which never came into being. And the relationship between the stadium and the surrounding neighborhoods was always a contentious one. For many of the predominantly African-American residents of the surrounding neighborhoods, their relationships to the team was much more likely to be as an employee of the team than was to be a fan. In terms of the disruption of the neighborhoods, that certainly is an aspect of the stadium being there. There's also the aspect of many suburban fans feeling uncomfortable in the environs of the stadium, which are a which were undoubtedly a high crime area for many years. Code with a major league stadium with the highest crime rate. There's intense racial issues surrounding it that go on for well over 150 pages in the book. Is there any other particular angles you want me to go into? But that's a major aspect of the book, the racial politics of Atlanta in the 60s and 70s.
This is off subject a little bit, Clayton.
Yes.
University of Nebraska Press. How
Yes.
difficult was it to find a publisher for this book? And tell me about University of Nebraska Press. What caught their eye with you, this project?
Well, the University of Nebraska Press is highly focused on sports history. It's really become their bread and butter. They publish 20 different sports history titles a year, and as I would argue, become probably the top pro sports history press around. It was a topic that potentially had an audience in a large market, I think is how they looked at it, and also had a scholarly angle to it too. I mean, it's a story of the politics and economy and culture of a major American city during a period of transition as well. In terms of getting the book after I finished my dissertation, I consulted with some writers I knew who had gone from being professional historians to being authors in a more popular sense, and they gave me some advice on finding an agent. I sought out and got an agent for the book. We shopped it around. Nebraska turned out to be the best home from it. We looked at about 20 different places, got a couple of offers, and this was the best one. And I was very excited for it to go with Nebraska because I looked at my bookshelf and saw a half dozen Nebraska sports books and was very proud to be associated with the fine catalog of sports history that they have.
Clayton, I'll let this go, but I just want to ask you, would you mind, I'm assuming Matt's got your email address. If Matt gave me your email address so I can contact you about the agent book process a bit, just ask you a couple of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can chat on the phone about it too if you want to. Let's see. One thing I'd also like, just as a matter of plugging. You have the link to the book up there.
Yeah, I didn't happen to make a big deal out of it, but I think that's what prompted.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You saw it that I was sharing that. So yes,
thank you so much.
Yeah, February 2022 is when the book is expected.
Available.
You were
order on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all your notable online book retailers. I'll just say my email. My email is ctruder@gmail.com. I'll edit it, make sure it gets emailed to you as well.
Yeah, I will make sure I distribute that to everybody after the meeting. So, as a matter of fact, I think Clayton, I put you on the invite for tonight's meeting. Did I not?
I
invite.
think so. Yeah, I think I am. Yes.
Yeah. So it's.
No,
I think
you included me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's in that email that I sent out last week with the Zoom invite. In case you want to reference that, Roger, or anybody else.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions for Clayton about the book or his experience in writing it? I did want to ask one question, Clayton. I think this is something I always like to ask authors when we have them join us for a presentation or a discussion about their book is, what's next for you? What's your next topic?
Well, I'm currently in the, I won't go to, I'm negotiating a deal for a second book, which is about college basketball, actually. So I'm going in a little bit different direction, but about college basketball in Boston in the 1980s, which is a surprising hotbed of it and had some very prominent coaches such as Jim Calhoun and Rick Pitino and Gary Williams all coaching there at the same time. So it's about this kind of forgotten cradle of coaches that existed in Boston in the 80s.
Okay, cool. Well, also a fan of college basketball, as I imagine many of us are. That sounds like a very interesting topic. Look forward to that book as well. Anything else?
Fall 2023, hopefully.
Fall 2023. Yeah. Okay. Here we are. Year and a half after Loserville. Here comes the next. Yeah. Turn you into a regular old mill of publications.
Well, I sure hope so.
Thanks so much, Clayton. That was really interesting.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Clayton.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you joining us.
Clayton.
Hey,
The presentation.
Yes, definitely look forward to this book, Loserville by Clayton Truder, February 2022 from Nebraska Press.
hey, Matt, while you're on the subject of books,
Yes, sir.
I want to hold this up because I had a hard time going through it with the dry eye. And this is Roger's book. I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know if you can see it when I'm holding it up. And maybe I missed it's the Remember book he did. And it is fantastic. I mean, you can't I did have a dry eye at times going through it. It may have a different meaning to veterans, I don't know, but it should have the same meaning to all of us. The only downside.
Great
You guys
book.
even know what I'm talking about? Roger, have you talked about this with the rest of them?
No, it's not a baseball book, so no,
Right.
just
Well, I
real
wanted to
quickly.
plug it because you're a SABR member, and I just want to tell folks what a wonderful book it was. And I hope I got back to you with an appropriate email.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Last month, that's why I didn't know if there'd been any discussion.
Brent, I think you're breaking up there.
Coming in, if you can, I'm losing my, but I think it's on my end.
Okay.
Glenn and Frank, I think maybe you that I've actually heard every word you've spoken. I missed a good part of the last presentation, but I heard enough of it to get the drift. So it was interesting enough. I'm sitting in my office. I'm too far away, I think. And my network bandwidth is low, it keeps telling me.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. Well, hang in there if you can, because we still got one more presentation.
Yeah, I'm trying.
It's a good one, I promise you. Chuck's presentation on greatest catchers. Chuck, would you like me to turn the presentation over to you, or would you just want to go ahead and give the presentation verbally, and I'll just keep pace?
Well, can I share the screen here?
Yeah.
And it'll work?
Let me do this. Let me turn the presentation over to you. Give me just a second. All right, Chuck, you should be the host now, so you should be able to go ahead and share your screen, your PowerPoint presentation on the greatest catchers in the history of Major League Baseball.
Right. Got just covered.
Oh,
And there we are.
yeah.
Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, I want you to, as kind of like a preamble to all of this, this is the third assembly that I've done for SABR. First was in the late 90s when I took Bill James runs created and Bill James win shares per 100 games played and stacked up all the catchers and came up with a list of 25 or so. On that list, there were about 6 or 7 that I felt should have been in the Hall of Fame or on their way. Subsequently, 3 ended up in the Hall of Fame: Piazza, Rodriguez, and Simmons. And then in 2009, the summer, for a SABR baseball reference journal article, I took 5 offensive stats, 5 defensive stats, and sliced them and stacked them in such a manner that and it's called a Z-score, and I won't bore you for those who are non-stat head, had a Z-score that essentially the lowest member of the list was 0, and the highest member of each stat list was a 1. And everyone else was stacked within their corresponding to where they fell within that score. Therefore, then I could take all 10 scores and kind of average them, weigh them, multiply them in a variety of ways to come up with a group of great catchers. Not so much who's number 1 or anything, but just showing the deck. Here is the current Hall of Fame. 19 members of the Hall of Fame. The one that you don't see is a Rick Farrell. I don't know if folks have covered over with all of our things. There were 10 members put in by the Baseball Writers Association, 6 by the old timers, veterans, and 3 by the Negro League Committee. If you were to go by the 22,000 major leaguers to date and saying, okay, we have players, we have roughly 250 major league players, and that we can slice them by the position that they played most often. And if we were to separate them out, you'll see that the overrepresentative is first base at 2%, and that the underrepresentative is catchers and pitchers, less than 1%, based upon how many played the game at the pro level with 10 years of service. That's the breaking point, 10 years of service, going through all the players that played. By my calculation, there should be, to make everybody equal by their position, 3 more catchers, 20 more pitchers, 4 third base, and 1 outfielder. That would kind of bring everybody close to the 2% across the board. But we know that's never, ever going to happen. Now,
Chuck, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just while we're on this chart, who were the 3 catchers? You had said you had identified 6 in that earlier
Piazza,
research.
Rodriguez, and Simmons.
Who were the 3 that didn't get in so far that you had identified?
You'll see that at the end.
Okay.
Or since you already got the PDF file, you can jump all the way to the back end and see it. Okay.
I like the suspense.
All right.
My computer doesn't have that much memory, Chuck.
Oh, okay.
Woo.
Now here are the catchers through approximately July 1st. There may be a few others that came up I'm unaware of. What I want to just show you is kind of like not the 194 that caught 800 or more games, although they had 10 years and are, quote, eligible in the sense that they played for 10 years. My interest more or less falls on the 33 who caught 1,500 or more games in their career. And as we go through this, you're going to see how I've laid out the brief. The entire brief is based upon every stat has 2 slides. Here's the stats. The black stats are the ones I'm going to show you. The ones in blue I used in the ranking, but they're at the end of the brief and I won't be going through all of those. Each stat will have 2 slides. One is the top 5 in order, shown 1 through 5, and slide B will show 1 through 125 for you to get a flavor of where your favorite backstops are at. Any questions in regard to what stats that were used? Now, for my purposes, I could have added 15 or more other stats involved, but it would not have altered the end result. No matter whether you love it or like myself, you hate war, how you want to do it, it still doesn't change the end result, as you'll see when we get to the end of the pitch. Now, I wanted to reiterate the difference in stats of counting stats, such as count hits, home runs, so forth, rate stats, such as batting average and so forth, where you take two counting stats, divide one by the other, and that's a rate stat. Then you have comparative stats, such as ops plus, which compares your ops to the league average each year, to other players, etc. And then I have what I call the contrived stats, which you'll hear more about, is that those are the 5 parts of war: double base, double play, runs, fielding runs, base running runs. These prior to 2014 are estimated. Prior to 2001, it is wild ass swagged and worthless to have any of that part. But we'll skip that for some other drill. Here's the first stat that we're going into. And as you will see throughout the brief and throughout the stats, I don't know if you can see my arrow going through here. Here's our Florida State dude. Anytime there's a current player, his name is going to appear in red. Anytime you see that, his name is going to appear in red. This is what I call slide 1 of 2 for the stats of Ops Plus. Here is the top 25, and you'll see 2 of the current players that are in here. I had the Hall of Fame in bold, but for something, PowerPoint didn't like it when I copied it over. Don't ask me why. That's stat number 1. I'm going to be going through this. You can stop me at any time and ask me on any of the other stats that we go to. Here's on-base percentage. On-base percentage. You see some of the old guys there. Roger Bresnan, turn of the century, the other century, 1900. Wally Shang, who unfortunately got screwed out of the Hall of Fame in regards to who? The only clean Black Sox. Excuse me. And on-base percentage is something that was favors earliest part of the game, as you'll see here. A couple of the players who did well under Bill James's win shares kind of drop out when you look at these, I call it the most favorable stats, ops on base, batting average, and so forth. That's why when I first did this, I preferred the Bill James breakdown. Batting average of balls in play. This is considered to being offensively the stat for catchers. You don't expect catchers to be a bench or piazza to knock home runs right and left. You expect them to move runners across. That's why I show that as compared to just the straight batting average.
Chuck, would you define batting average of balls in play, please?
The batting average, what, sir?
Batting average of balls in play.
Okay, batting average is defined up here. That's your hits minus your home runs, divided
Oh.
by your at-bats, removing strikeouts and home runs, and adding sacrifice flies. I have at the top of the chart here, the formula,
Okay.
balls in play. This is putting the balls in play, whether you've done a good job or not. Move runners across, get on base yourself, and so forth. That's normally the job of the 7th through 9th batters in the order.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
that's considered a key offensive score that coaches look at under the minor leagues. They don't look at home runs by the squatter.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, the other stat here is runs produced. This is kind of like it's your RBIs plus you scoring a run yourself. And since a home run would count both, an RBI and you scoring a run, you have to knock out one of those home run counts or whatever it is. This is a key figure that I believe the Cooperstown, when they provide the stats for the ballot consideration as part of the stats, I believe runs produced is one of the stats that they give a breakdown on, and they compare it to all others of their kinship or their group or their average or whatnot. Once you've introduced Ted Simmons at number 8 spot, you'll see that the only one of Jorge Posada is the only one that's not in the Hall of Fame on runs produced. That more or less says is that for every 100 games, Bill Dickey more or less produced 1 run.
Okay.
108.27 runs per 100 games, whether he hit the RBI or he scored the run himself. That's an awful lot of offense out of a catcher.
There is.
And here's for Jim and others who love war, and for Jaws is really a J. Jaffe corruption of wars by taking the career war, which says that the longer you live and play the game, the higher your war score. So he says he's going to grab your 7 most potent or most productive war years and average that with your career, which would bring down your career total to only your productive year total. That kind of puts the damper on play for 50 years, kind of like to have your war score go up.
What's the span on the productive war
Say again?
when you were referenced?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Well,
catch.
you were saying how the longevity affects the average, or as you called it, productive war. Is there a designated span on what is accepted as productive war
You
in
mean
terms of seasons?
it's 7 years. That's what J.
Okay.
Jaffe, the stat head, came up with as the number.
Okay.
He took all the guys who had a war, a cumulative war of 75 or more, career-wise, and looked at what was their 5 best years, 7 best years, 10 best years. And he came up with the fact that in truth, their most potent time was 7 years. So these 7 years under the Jaffe score is not consecutive years, but the 7 years that they produced the most. So things like the COVID 2021 year is not going to hurt the guys or whatnot because they didn't have the games. You're seeing who, can you see the arrow flipping through or none?
Yes.
Okay. You're seeing whose name is cropping up every now and then in red. Just, just to bring it to your attention.
Buster Posey, you mean?
Okay. The top 5 games caught. I bring this up. It's a counting stat. But one of the difficulties is that if you just look at games played for catcher, you'll see that after the 17th year, they're not playing at catcher. They're being used in a variety, third base, left field, first base, DH, you name it. And in some cases, like Joe Torre, he got switched over from the Braves to playing third base in the outfield. Yet their games played in a career looks like, they played 3,000 games. But I look at it, if you're talking about great catchers, it's looking at their games caught. Games caught. I can also give you, I don't have it instantly, but if anybody would want to know the percentage of games caught of their career games played, and it's the guys are in the Hall of Fame are Prittner at the top, 75-80% of games caught to games played. So they squatted almost their entire career. Now, here's where I flip to a rate stat in which I say you have to have some criteria before you use a rate stat. Otherwise, you can have a guy that, caught five games and it has a 100. So for the career, I picked 1,500 career games caught. Now, you can knock that down to 1,200. You can knock it down to 1,000, 800, whoever want to include. But then you start to get, as I call, chatter noise within there of the games caught. Here's a stat that played heavily at the turn of the 20th century. It also was a stat that was highly favored in the newspapers in the 19th century. They considered throwing out base runners and batters on infield bunts and so forth was a key skill that a catcher should have.
Chuck, most of those guys are, even you look at the top 6 or whatever, they were from a long time ago. Do you think that's because the runners were slower back then?
Nope.
Good question.
I don't know.
The way they played the game, if you were to look at the breakdown of what you call an assist, bunts, throwing out bunts, there was heavy in bunts, which we don't have that much anymore. And if you were also to look at where they got the assist for throwing out base runners, remember, a catcher does not get a put out for catching a base stealer. He gets an assist.
Right.
So anybody who attempts to steal a base, That's where the guys, quote, in our era, got a lot of their assists, was throwing out base runners.
Yeah, I forgot about the bunt. It's almost non-existent now.
I think I
Chuck.
saw one once in this past 10 years.
Chuck,
What's that?
I don't mean to. I don't mean to jump the gun, but is there a statistical way of accounting for, I guess, the reputation of a guy's arm, in that how infrequently do people run on them because they're known to be good at throwing people out?
Yes, I did a paper for SABR's BRJ, Professional Thieves Against the Constabulary, 10-15 years ago. And what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to identify the pro thieves. And the first breakdown was those who steal third base. Remember, being thrown out, it's only 90 feet away for the catcher to throw to third base, compared to 126 feet to second base. So there, you got to have some nerve to steal third base. Then I did all the guys, and what it ended up being is I took retro sheets, event files, 70 years of every single game, every event file, and selected out what happened to, I call it success, what happened subsequent to a catcher's success. Attempts went down against the good catchers. Against the poor catchers, attempts went up. So therefore you could say whose rate of attempted steals went down, and then look at prior to that time. You were seeing that they got 44-45% caught stealing. Then it was only the pro thieves who then stole. The everyday thief didn't attempt. And so it was also that the kind of games that were being played, if it was close games, nobody wanted to risk, and I call it the 1980s plus. The runner just parked himself at first. He would, in a close, a one-run game, would not attempt a second base steal. Kind of like minimize risk as compared to whatever. And then as the Mad Dash 2000-2005 time frame, they said, to hell with it, I'm just going to steal. I don't care what the score of the game is, because we're going to hit home runs and win anyhow. And so all of a sudden you had that change in the games, and they kind of ignored the arm of the catchers, which was great for guys like Yadier Molina, his older brother, Benji, and now Salvador Perez, because guys think they can run against anyone and they're given the green light. But I think the pro thieves will still try and still succeed. I think I did with against bench, I gave the 10 super thieves against bench in those days. And if you want to think back to that time, the names escape me now, but they were in the games that the Reds played in their league. There were some super thieves there that didn't
Corey
care.
Wills, what he won.
Lou Brock.
Lou Brock, yeah.
And as you see, they're going to say, I don't care what Ben Bench's arm is, I'm going to run. So.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Chuck, so jumped out at me there was Ivan Rodriguez, who certainly by reputation had the strongest and most accurate arm of his era. He's well down on the list. So I'm with Clayton. I'm just suspecting that reputation reduced his opportunities for assists because people ran on him less.
That's true, but and remember, I scaled that to per 100 games played. So if they're not going to run and they're only going to run once every 6th or 7th game, you're right. You know, his assist per 100 games is going down.
Far be it from me to suggest an alternative statistic to you, but maybe a better measure is assist per base stealing attempt.
Assist per what?
Assist per base stealing attempt.
There is a stat. I don't know if it's called the range factor or it's in there in my spare change at the back end, and in which it's how your success rate. The biggest success rate, does anybody know, for caught stealing as a percentage for a career? Say with 800 games caught. Who's number one all time?
Total guess, bench at maybe 42, 3 or 4%.
50.
Rodriguez should be up there.
54%. 54%.
Whoa.
Roy Campanella.
Really?
Yes. Now remember, he played in the air like I did when I was growing up as a kid with the old pillow mitt. We didn't have no hinge mitt or the new Yogi Berra. The old pillow mitt was a two-handed catching, and yet he could throw out as a career 54%. His Negro League stats show something like 70%, but all of those stats are going to take years upon decades to iron out true stats from newspaper junk. Okay, for defensive WAR, I use that because it's heralded, if you want to call it, by SABR. The component piece, John DeWar, as the defensive indexes and rankings and so forth. I bring this up because the component parts of defensive WAR, there's 3 parts of it that are very wishy-washy. The 3 parts of DWAR. One is called R field, which is runs attributed to fielding expertise. Then there is RDP, double play. Then there is R baser, base runners. What this says for the first 2, for base runners and double plays, if you don't have stat track software, cameras, machinery, etc., plus proprietary software, you won't even know. You won't even know how to compute that, and you have to rely upon them. That's why I said that didn't come into solid being until 2014. Then you have runs fielding, which to a degree you have back solid to 2001, but prior to that time, you're still relying upon the putouts, assists, and errors, and so forth. And so you might as well. Anyways, I had to include defense WAR only because the fact that is you want to say that's a stepchild of SABR. This is a career games caught as a percentage above the league average. In other words, this is the guys who didn't spend their entire career playing, if you want to say, left field, right field, DH, third base, and so forth. Al Lopez was a great manager. He does not show up that well in any of the stats, but he's a long-term manager. Here's the group. This is kind of what you were talking about the, if you take the caught stealing and you subtract the league average caught stealing, the difference, the differential, you put that in your career pocket and you add them all up in your career. So for Ivan, it's 315 caught stealing above the league average in his 20-year career.
Yeah, Chuck, this, I wasn't familiar with this. This gets to right what I was referring to. Yeah.
But as you'll see, just by the color of the pictures there, is that it kind of favors the old folks. Now, here's something that the Gold Glove in 1957, Silver Slugger in 1980 as an award. But back in the 90s, Pete Palmer came up with an idea of how to retroactive award Gold Glove and Silver Slugger, going back to 1876. And that's essentially what I've done for catchers only. I didn't go back for any other position. It would get too complicated once you're trying to deal with 22,000 players in the Major League. Essentially what you're doing is you're trying to find the best fielder of the known stats that we use, the fielding percentage, as compared to the league average for a 100, for only those guys who caught in half of their games, half of their team's games, and use the same kind of a thing for Silver Slugger. Then I can go back to 1876, have the list, and seeing who got the most Gold Gloves, or who would have had we had the Gold Gloves in 1876. By the way, I don't know if you can see Jim Sundberg has 6 Gold Gloves.
That's about how many words he said when I interviewed him a couple of years ago. 15 questions, 49 words.
And here's the top 25 Gold Gloves. Now, the blue one says that some or all of their years were retroactive Gold Gloves. And here's the Silver Sluggers who won these awards. Same rules. We still have some retroactive Silver Sluggers, obviously from 1980 on. And these are the list of 25 Silver Slugger awards. And here's what I call the Super Catcher Award, receiving a Gold Glove and a Silver Slugger in the same year. And these are actual awards. I didn't factor in the retroactive one. Lance Parrish, by the way, won 2, along with Benito. All-Star games. Actual All-Star games. So that would exclude some of the 1900 game.
You know if Elston Howard had all those as a catcher?
Yeah, on the list, there was 12 All-Stars. It says on one was a catcher, but he was not catching at the time, even though he was selected as a catcher.
Okay. Thank you.
It's happened with a couple of others as well. And these are the MVP award winners. I think the 1950s was the decade of the catchers between Campanella and Berra. They won, what was it? 1/3 of all the awards. And here's the also rans. And here's what I call my 3-2-1. On all of those charts I was showing you with all those pictures and diagrams, the number 1, who got the number 1? Who got on that same thing with the colored pictures in frame? Who got number 2 through 5? Then in the second chart, who got 6 through 25? And I just said, okay, I'm going to assign on a basis of 3-2-1. If you were number 1, I'm going to give you 3 points. If you were 2 through 5, I'm going to give you 2 points. If you appeared on 6 through 25, you're going to get 1 point for each of the 25 stats. I should like to point out that Ivan Rodriguez, out of the 25 stats, appears on 23 of those. Bill Dickey appears 20 of those. Compared to the number 1 slot. Now here's where I said I could care less who's number 1, 2, or 3. They're all in the Hall of Fame. But I want you to look at the green guys here. Lance Parrish, Jason Kendall, Bob Boone, and Jim Sundberg. By the way, Parrish, Boone, and Sundberg were the 3 of the 6 that didn't get into the Hall of Fame. One Piazza, Rodriguez, and Simmons did. So that answers, Roger, your question at the end of the night or whatever. That is the guys who I feel. And coming up at, and as you saw his name appear over and over and over, Molina, the younger Molina, Yadier. He has appeared significantly throughout that. And he's doing a great job the current year. Who I think, I'm biased, but that's it.
Well, Chuck, thank you. I love this. So when you got started, I wrote down Rodriguez, Bench, and Berra as the 3 greatest.
Well, you know, as one guy, I forgot the comedian's name, he said he can't remember who was his best of his 3 ex-wives, and or the worst of his 3 ex-mother-in-laws. So I, you know, they're all in the Hall of Fame, you know, other than a few guys that got in. One of the things that I felt that Wally Chang should have gotten in instead of Ray Schock. I wrote an article called The Shawshank Redemption, showing that in every category, Wally was ahead of Ray. And the only reason Ray went into the Hall of Fame because he was the only clean Black Sox.
Chuck, I have a question. I noticed you did not mention the greatest left-handed catcher of all time.
The greatest left-handed catcher, Clement, is the only one that I know of.
Jack Clemens.
Yes.
He had four times as many games as any left-handed catcher in history.
Well, he was the only left-handed catcher
Well,
that,
he batted
that was more than 300 games.
287. His lifetime batting average was 287. He's in 1,200 games. Made a lot of errors, though. 400. But he played with teams, major league teams considered, the Philadelphia Quakers and other Philadelphia teams back in the 80s and 90s, 1890s. And here's, if you like, well, this is trivia. You don't know me that well, but he's buried in Arlington Cemetery in Drexel Hill, a few feet from my parents, in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. But that's back when Philadelphia, they had the international leagues and things like that. But they haven't had any left-handed catchers to speak of in the 1900s.
Nope.
Jack Clemens.
I'm sorry, no left-handed catcher since him?
Sorry?
Well, we've had a couple, but,
Yeah.
you know, 30 some odd games
Yeah.
that we've,
He
on my old website that is defunct, I gave the list of left-handed catchers and how they got it and where they went when they stayed into baseball.
He batted 287 lifetime, which is not
Mhm.
bad. He did make 400 errors, which is a fair amount. I'm not sure if that was the era when they had the two catchers in a row, remember?
Yeah.
I go back a ways. You look like a young guy. You wouldn't remember.
Chuck, I was wondering if there's a way of accounting for something like the catcher called a good game. Is there any statistical way of doing that more intangible aspect of the job?
Well, you could use what I call it, call the umpire a liar, which was framing stat, which is essentially giving credit to the catcher for a strike that was obviously a ball that the umpire called, or should have called. No, the framing pitches is a
Art form.
coaching camera viewed stat that you help improve the catcher. It should not be a ranking rating salary determining stat for framing the pitch. The thing of calling a good game, there's so many young guys out there now that don't actually call the games. Surprisingly, you can look at them, look over to third base or dugout to get the pitch call. They don't actually call the pitches themselves. Here at Florida,
I was thinking of a guy like Thurman Munson. I recently read a book of his that Ron Bloomberg did a book about Munson, who's their friendship, and spoke about all the different pitchers who cited what a good job he did calling games and familiarizing young pitchers with what it was like to pitch in the major leagues. So I'm wondering something more intangible like that, if there's a way of quantifying that, or is that something more that's just a more ethereal aspect of judging someone's Hall of Fame worthiness?
it should be, but it's not, because everything is anecdotal kind of statements, and I love my guy, but I hate your guy kind of an approach. all I know is that Texas Ranger pitchers said that Ivan Rodriguez knew every batter, query, right, left, upside down, which kind of a pitch, and communicated that before the game to his pitchers. And that when they got in the game, he and his pitcher were in sync of what they were going to throw to every single batter. Now, you can't put that down in stats, knowing somebody's game book beforehand, but that's kind of the talent that is out there. I've seen calls made or a pitch thrown. It's hard to say who made the call, but I've seen pitches thrown that was, quote, against the prevailing winds of what you should throw in a certain situation, but the catcher knew what his guy could throw that day at that time. And if he still had something, that's what you ask him to throw. The idea is to get the guys out, period.
Chuck, I got a comment and I want to hear your response to it, but it seems to me that the catcher position has become more challenging than ever today, because if you go back to the 40s, 50s, even the 60s, a typical catcher might see 2 or 3 pitchers during the course of a game. Today, you're lucky if a starting pitcher goes 5 innings, 6 innings, and it's not unusual for a catcher to see 6, 7, even 8 pitchers during the course of a game, all with different stuff, all with a lot of velocity and a lot of different movement. And to know each one of those pitchers and what to call in preparation for the people that they're facing, it just seems like a much more difficult game today. What do you think?
Very difficult. However, that pregame stuff that I talked about is vitally important, to have that discussion an hour before the game, before you walk out into infield practice or batting practice, for you to be, you and your staff to be aware, because you don't know who's actually going to be in the game that day. You have an idea who will not be, but you know, some of these players are very, I'm going to say, on again, off again. The pitchers, on again, off again from day to day. And it isn't only until the first couple of pitches that you can say, we got through that. Now I know what my guy has and what he don't have. And so I can't go to what he don't have. I have to go to what he has got for each of the players that are up there. And the war between Carter and Fisk, they said once Carter was in the Hall of Fame, the doors opened up for anyone to get in. I don't agree with that. But between the two, Carter and Fisk had a much far superior understanding of the batters and his staff, how they could deal with it. And he was not so much of a, I'm going to say, a chit chatter, quiet, more of a quiet guy than the news hound. But he knew his staff quite well. One of the things is that was very frustrating when you change teams, White Sox, Red Sox kind of a thing, is that you now know what at least some of the enemy is about. And I've seen that for those that understand their pitching staff real good, you can, if you get traded, you can certainly use that to your advantage, which I believe Fisk was one of those that knew his pitchers quite well. If that's it, we've gone way beyond our time.
Another excellent presentation, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck.
Very interesting,
Thanks,
Chuck.
Chuck. That was fantastic.
Very good, thanks.
How can I get rid of this? Let me see the chat thing. Where's the folks? Participants. And it says that I give you command and control. Is that it?
Yep, much to your eternal regret, you just did.
Did that?
Much to your eternal regret, you just gave me control, whether you know it or not.
No, it didn't go over. Did it go over to you?
Yeah, actually, that's part of it's one of the functions I have is the Zoom post, is I can reclaim post at any time.
Oh, you can steal it. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, if you want to put it in those terms, that's, appropriate to your presentation. I stole a bag on you there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you once again, Chuck. Appreciate it. Great presentation. That was very cool. I enjoyed looking through those slides ahead of time as Chuck shared them with me in the categories he was going to rank these guys on. I'm not surprised by his greatest of all time. His choice is the GOAT catcher. I already had a hunch, knowing who you have on your wallpaper on your laptop sometimes.
Yes.
So, all right. And Clayton, once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for.
Oh, what a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. That was great.
That was great. He just
Thank you,
put in
Clayton.
the chat a hyperlink to his book, again, University of Nebraska Press, Loserville, forthcoming in February 2022. Anything else, gentlemen, for the good of the order?
I have one thing, just an observation. I just want to know what everybody thought of it.
Sure.
This silly thing that they've got going now with the home run. Philly's got some kind of a hat. San Diego's got some kind of a thing they spin on their. What the heck? It's like what was it? Florida State last a couple seasons ago had the backpack or some kind of thing. I just think, what is going on? I don't know if you had to say. I just think it's
gimmicks for
I don't
social
know, people
media.
are trying to have fun.
Yeah.
I guess so.
It's camaraderie, team building stuff. I'm perfectly fine with it. And I think it does make it fun, whether it appeals to you or not, it gets you talking and thinking and kind of
It did
you in certain ways. So I'm perfectly fine with it. I think it's cool.
Yeah. Okay. I just think it's silly.
I think it's a bit contrived. I think a lot of their marketing guys think of this stuff.
Yeah, I do too.
That could possibly be it too. Sometimes I think it's actually the players thinking of some of this crazy stuff, but they get inspired by other marketing efforts they see, like in the NBA or the NFL.
I don't think the Mets marketing people were doing the thumbs down. So.
No, that's
Definitely not.
going back to the topic from earlier this evening. No, I think that was all the players, boy. They came up with it. all on their
all the teams don't do it, just a few, right?
Right. Yes.
Well, when you're winning, you do it.
The Red Sox have a shopping cart they push a guy around the dugout in.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
A laundry cart, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Laundry cart. Nice. Well, dugouts are big enough these days where you can actually
That's great. But
park a truck in there if you wanted to. So, all right, folks. Well, before we say good evening, one last thing. I know we had been working on kind of a every other month schedule with Zoom meeting 1 month as the format for our monthly meeting, and then next month in person. We had got back on that schedule in June. We were in person, and then July and Zoom and so forth. With the uptick in COVID cases in this area due to the Delta variant and breakthrough cases and so forth, just put it out there without any sort of decision tonight that we may consider Zoom again for next month's meeting in October. But that's to be further discussed and determined via email later this month. So look for that in a follow-up email after I post the recording from tonight's meeting and the minutes from tonight's meeting that Mr. Putnam is so assiduously documented.
Was I supposed to take notes?
Oh, crap. Did I forget to tell you that?
I knew I forgot something.
I'm sorry. We didn't have the pregame meeting, man. We didn't talk.
There you go.
I'm sorry. We just
Okay.
We should have.
You didn't give me the signal, so I forgot.
No. My bad. We'll work on that.
Okay.
Anything else, folks?
Just other than thank you, Clayton, thank you, Chuck. Boy, this is the best kind of Zoom meeting when there's two really neat presentations.
Yeah, two
Excellent.
great
Here, here.
presentations.
Thank you.
Here.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Very good, thanks.
Completely concur.
And Clayton, we can keep you in the loop if you want to come back and spend more time with us.
Oh, love to. I go to about 7 different chapters meetings, so I'm suddenly part of your chapter, I guess. Looking forward to it.
Well, congratulations. Don't say we didn't warn you. So, all right, folks, with that, I think we'll call it a wrap. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good
Clayton.
night, everybody.
Thanks for joining us,
Thank
Tom
you.
and Sam, and good to see y'all. And we'll see next month. Y'all take care.
Supreme leader.
Bye.
My pleasure.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you,
Betcha.
man.
Good night.